Until you deal with death, you cannot live your life. Did you know that fear is the cousin of death? And today on the Young Wiseman Podcast, we are going to talk about fear. Because if you are wise, you understand the role that fear plays in your life and what to do about it. Because the truth is, if you are controlled by fear, you are not living your life. So until you deal with death, you cannot live your life. You know, in my life, I've ran across many different types of fear, but they usually fall into these three categories. We got the fear of man, the fear of what other people think about us. We have the fear of failure, the fear of losing out, not making it, not being good enough. And then we have the fear of the unknown, the fear of things that we have yet to understand. So let's jump right in and deal with this death so we can move on and live our lives. Because as long as we're uncertain of fear, uncertain of death, we're not living our life. And we only live once. Now, this podcast also is on the heels of some recent losses in my life. I lost a friend. Shout out, big homie Will. Rest in peace. About a week ago. And then we just lost my wife's grandfather. Shout out Grandpa Bear. What a man of integrity, godly man that he was. So let's jump in. The fear of man. Man, the fear of man brings a snare. Do you know what a snare is? A snare is something that you get trapped in, and then the harder you try to run away from it, the harder it squeezes on you. You know, why is the fear of man a snare? That's because the harder we try to please other people, the more we get strangled of life ourselves. That is deep because it's true. The fear of man brings a snare. You know, why do we care so much about what other people think about us? I don't know. I mean, I deal with it constantly. We all do. And just like all these fears that we're talking about today and fear in general, if you don't acknowledge the fact that you have fear in your life, then you cannot deal with it properly. I mean, you have to first acknowledge that fear exists before you can crush it, before you can move on from it. Because as long as you live in denial that there is a fear in your life and you don't identify that fear properly, it's robbing you of life because you're lying to yourself. And I'm going to do a whole episode on lying to yourself, but it's the biggest deception. The great deception of life is us lying to ourselves. So don't lie to yourself about being afraid of what other people think. Now that could be as simple as raising your hand in the class. Sometimes it's speaking out against what you feel is wrong or right in the situation. What other people think controls you, that is a fear. You know, I know for myself, I hate posting social media stuff. That is not for me. I dislike putting myself out there on a platform where other people can judge. Why? Because I'm afraid of what other people may or may not think about me. Now, if you catch me one-on-one, I'll tell you everything. But when you put it out there freely to be judged by the unforgiving world of social media and the internet, who always wins, the internet never loses, that is a fear. And by identifying it, I can crush it because I cannot live my life until I deal with that fear. So the fear of what other people think brings a snare, and you are wise to understand that you have this in your life. You are wise to understand that you deal with this fear, and you are wise to move on past this fear. Don't let the fear of what other people think hold you down from living your life. Because somebody's always going to disagree with you. Somebody's not going to always like you. And you have to accept that and be okay with that and then move on from that. Because until you deal with death, you cannot live your life. And fear is the cousin of death. And the next fear I want to address right now is the fear of failure. The fear of failure. You know, when you're young, you don't let failure control you. But as you get older, your comfort zone shrinks. You become more brittle and less pliable. And the fear of failure robs you of growth in your life. You reduce your comfort zone because you're afraid to take that leap. You say, I'm getting closer to the end, so I can't take as much risk. Whatever your excuse is, the fear of failure is robbing you from your life. You know, I know this is true in my own life because I look back and I remember I was trying to get a job at the Lexus dealership. And boy, I wanted that job. So I dropped off my application and I picked up the phone and I was calling every single day. Yo, what's up with that job? I haven't heard anything from you. Just trying to follow up. And I blew up that manager over there trying to get this job. You know what? I ended up getting the job. And then years later, I'm moving forward. I'm in my kickboxing gym business at the time. And I want to pick up the phone to call somebody to follow up about a membership sale. And I have this hesitancy inside of me. Like, man, maybe they don't want to hear from me. Maybe they're not interested. Making excuses for myself. I was afraid of failure. And just like the fear of man, the fear of failure, if you're wise, you recognize it in your life. And that allows you to blow past it. And it allows you to live your life because until you deal with death, you cannot live your life. And fear is the cousin of death. And we have to crush fear in our life. The fear of failure is robbing you of growth. You know, put yourself outside of your normal comfort zone on a consistent basis and you'll see growth happen exponentially. But usually the older you get, the tighter your comfort zone becomes and the less and less and less things you end up trying as you get older. Instead, it should be opposite way. As you grow older, you should try more things. You should do more that excites you and grows your comfort zone. But as we get older, the fear of failure just slowly chips away at our heart. And before you know it, we live in this really tight, small circle and we're afraid to fail. We're afraid to go big. We feel like we have too much on the line to lose. We act like we have tomorrow promised. We act like we have some security, which we do not. The fear of failure is robbing you from your life. You know, I see it in the lives of business owners, especially small business owners, all the time. You know, when you first start your business, you have to go for it. You're going for broke. You're all in. All your poker chips are on the table. But then what happens is as you get going in business, you become less and less risky. Somehow you have some false security, some lane that you live in, and you think that you're not going to fail or failure is going to bankrupt you. But at the beginning, you were going for broke. You went all in. The fear of failure is robbing people of life on a daily basis. And until you deal with death, you cannot live your life. Fear is the cousin of death, and today we're putting to death fear. And as we move on to the last fear that I want to address today, the fear of the unknown. This is the biggest, greatest fear that people will ever face. We're afraid of what we don't understand, so because we can't understand it or comprehend it, we ignore it, we reject it, and we fear it. What are you afraid of? What unknown are you facing? The great unknown is death, and I'll deal with that here in a second. But there's so many unknowns in our life. We have unknowns about other cultures. We have unknowns about other careers. We have unknowns about letting people know who we really are. There is so many unknowns. We have unknowns about moving to a new city. We have unknowns about tomorrow's economy. We have unknowns. Everything is really unknown. What lives in the bottom of the ocean is unknown, and it scares us. So they can keep making horror flicks about some creepy things coming out of the ocean, and you'll keep watching it because the fear of the unknown is the biggest fear that exists. What lies on the other side of the universe? These things are unknown. And, whatever you choose to believe in your faith or religious views is completely up to you. But God made things to be known and to be unknown. The glory of God is in the mystery. God actually receives glory from the mystery of how he created the earth. It tells us in Proverbs 25. And then the glory of man is in figuring things out. And that's the truth. As human beings, we receive glory, we receive praise, Nobel Prizes, put on podiums when we figure things out. When we determine that gravity exists, when we figure out the formula to nuclear reactors, when we discover something new that sets the world on fire, you receive the highest praise from man. But God himself glories in keeping things hidden, keeping things a mystery, because it requires faith from us who believe in God to be who he is. And we don't need to know every single thing. And the fear of the unknown will drive you insane. So you can't live your life until you deal with death. And that's why I have to end on this one, because regardless of what you think, we're all going to pass away. You might not even like hearing that, but we're all going to go sleep with the fishies. We're not going to live forever in this life. And until you deal with death, you cannot live your life. You can't live your life constantly trying to avoid the thought of going to the grave. You have to deal with that in your heart. Now, for those who know God, it's at peace. You're at peace with death. You can actually know God on a personal relationship better than any friendship or spouse that you might have. And if you didn't know that, I wanted to tell you that you can know God intimately and personally, and he wants you to know who he is. And that is the truth. But because death is unknown, we just have a big question mark around that point in our life. And you know what? You don't have to believe in my God to be at peace with death. Other people, they have some kind of peace with death, and that's between them and God and whatever else they got going on in their heart. But until you settle that in your heart, you're going to live in fear during your whole life. You're going to make decisions trying to extend your life, trying to manipulate your situation. But in the end, you cannot control what happens. We all will face death. So don't ignore it. Deal with it. Because if you deal with it now, you can at least live the life that you have during the moments that you have them. But if you continually live in fear of death, you are not living your life. And if you're not living your life, what is the point? Recently I was at a meeting with a new friend of mine, and she works with a law firm, and they do estates and wills and trusts and things like that. And she said the biggest problem that people face, probably myself included, is people don't want to take care of their will because they're forced to think about what happens when they die, right? We're forced to think about what happens when they die, and we don't like thinking about that. But as long as you don't deal with death, you're not living your life. So identify where fear is in your life. You have the fear of others, you have the fear of failure, and you have the fear of unknown, all taking part and playing a role in the decisions that you make every single day. So until you deal with this death, which is the cousin is fear, until you deal with it, you're not living your life. Live your life freely, afraid from fear, away from fear. Identify fear. Identify the factors that are causing you to stay in fear and take them by the chains and break them. You don't have to live in fear. You can live your life fully today. But if you're not wise, you'll ignore it and you'll stay in fear. But if you're wise, you'll recognize where the fear is in your life. You will break that fear. You will take the steps necessary to deal with that fear. And you are going to live life to the full potential of what you can. But as long as fear controls you, you're not actually living your life. This is John Shafi'i, the Young Wiseman Podcast. And don't forget, until you deal with death, you cannot live your life. Fear is the cousin of death. So let's crush fear, let's kill fear, and let's move on and live our best lives.